So during the holiday, I wanted to bring some focus to some really important news that just came out. It turns out the University of Guelph up in Canada is now offering a real-time PCR test for nidovirus. This is something that you may have heard me talk about before on podcasts like Animals at Home, and you've probably heard people mention. Here in the US, we have Fish Head Labs and Vet DNA that can both do these tests for your animals. Overseas, they can look at PALS UK or Leb Boklin. Not sure I'm saying that correctly, but either of those two places have some really great testing that they can offer for your animals, from everything from nidovirus to arena to IBD, or I'm sorry, arena that which causes IBD, and mycoplasma, just a ton of different things that they can test for to make sure that your animals are healthy. This is something that's commonly done with other animals. I'm sure that everybody is familiar with and uses examples like parvo. So parvo is something that, of course, you'd find in dogs. Rabies, same thing. When these animals are tested, there is a combination of tests that can be used, from antibody to PCR. PCR is the oldest and easiest method for people to use. You could technically do it in your kitchen. One of my previous videos, we talked about PCR that was able to find out if an animal had a carrier of a recessive gene. So speaking of recessive genes, we're going to show you this little guy here. So this is my little buddy that was produced here from snakes stocked from Canova, Justin Kibelka, of course. And you can see he's confusion. You can see that cool little belly. And then also Het Lav, which I think is what is responsible for these really faded pattern right along the side. Now, of course, I could say that that's a marker for Het Lav, or I could get him PCR tested and confirm that he's Het Lav. Of course, his mother was visual recessive Het Lavender albino, so of course he is Het Lav, I already know. However, the fact that we soon will be able to do this is just amazing. So now we have, oh, look at the little guy just really enjoying that sleeve there. So now we have the ability to do these tests in Canada for specifically nidovirus. This is something that is just, it's groundbreaking. We've got a lot of really great breeders up in Canada, including Mutation Creation, who has previously participated with universities like Guelf to do studies on ball python genetics. Since ball pythons have so many different morphs available and so many different genes responsible, they're a really great animal to help further our understanding of genetics in these animals, but also in humans and other animals. It's really, really a great opportunity. So if you haven't seen the video on calculating genetics, which I'll go ahead and throw up top, then you can see that and see what it would be if you were to combine something like this with another animal that was lavender albino or another confusion or leopard or some other fun things. You can also see, which I'll also throw up there, a link to the students at Eastern Michigan, or a video describing what the students in Eastern Michigan are doing in order to try to study genetics in ball pythons. The last I checked on that project, they were done receiving lavender albinos, so shed from this guy will probably not end up there. However, they are looking for yellow belly and anything allelic with yellow belly, of course. So if you've got any yellow belly or ivory animals, then definitely go ahead and send those sheds over to Eastern Michigan. But back on the topic of PCR. So it's really great to know that across the world, definitely across North America, now that we have complementary Fish Head Labs, Vet DNA, and now Guelph, we have testing available to prevent disease in these animals. That's something that you'll hear me discuss, especially when it comes to things like ethical keepers, which I really want to put in air quotes, which I, had a whole video on why I kind of disagree with even using that term. So those ethical keepers, we rarely ever hear about them doing any testing for things like ADV, arena, or even nidovirus. If you go back a few years, though, and you look for the K brothers, they actually have an entire video. The K brothers were really great breeders of some amazing pythons, which, nidovirus primarily affects pythons. And in their case, they were worried about sunshine in their facility and actually had their facility tested. You can watch the veterinarian go through and actually swab all of these animals to check for sunshine. Now, this is really amazing because you don't hear it that often anymore. In fact, you actually hear a lot of the opposite. Like you hear people that are trying to shove these issues out of the spotlight. You hear people that are trying to suddenly be, experts on the subject. You hear people accusing me of doing that. However, this is something, especially when it comes to nidovirus, that we've had plenty of information on since 2014. Pia Bartolini of the Reptile Preservation Institute, and along with Dr. Susan, appeared on Snakes and the Fat Man with Chris Eaton to talk about this and how pervasive it is in the industry. You can see a Herpeton talk that included how, and this was from, I believe it was from 2015, but it included how we were concerned with nidovirus becoming endemic. So endemic means that they would all just have it. And this isn't something that we want. There's a lot of confusion with COVID and all that other stuff around. So we're not really going to dig into that right now because we don't want to deal with all of that other disinformation. Like when people say that Arcadia lamps cure COVID, we're not even going to get into that again because that was an entire mess, right? Having everybody being able to engage in this ecosystem of preventing disease in these animals is something that should be paramount. It should be in every video from every supposedly ethical keeper, and it should be in every video for every breeder of these animals. Once again, you can go and see this topic being discussed by people like Brian Cusco. You can see it discussed by Garrett of Reach Out Reptiles. And of course, myself, I did a video with the Animals at Home podcast with Dylan. I still don't know why this isn't picked up by the ethical keepers. One of their tenets, or however you want to say it, is that they want to prevent disease. And the way that we prevent disease is we use these screening opportunities. The more people we have participating in this ecosystem, the better these tests will be, and potentially even the cheaper these tests will become. And it's not something that, is reptile. A lot of people believe reptiles exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in a vacuum. This isn't new for reptiles. This isn't new for animals. We've been doing PCR tests on animals for an incredibly long time. Reptiles just weren't given the same opportunity. So really it's about, giving these animals the same chance that we give other animals, because we have better, cheaper, faster medical for other animals. And we've just kind of left reptiles out of the equation. And again, we have people, in the community that kind of downplay the problems and try to really confuse people on how, we're able to screen for these diseases. One of the funniest things that I actually partook in, I think it was about a month ago, is over on the MorphMarket community forums. Now, this is the second time I've run into, staff at MorphMarket telling me that these diseases were, they were just giving misinformation. The first time was somebody claiming that they couldn't test 200 hatchlings, which is completely nonsensical. The second time was, of course, our buddy Travis Wyman that edited, censored, and then eventually banned me because he was 30 years out of date on some information and telling me that only privileged keepers are able to test these guys for viruses. That is absolutely not true. And when it comes to this snake, you can call me a privileged keeper if you want, because this snake, for less than 3%, if I was to look at this as a business and I was to say that I wanted to sell this snake and my cost for selling the snake included testing it before I shipped it out, it's less than 3% of the cost of the snake. A 3% uptick in the cost of the snake is generally not going to make or break a sale for somebody that's looking for something like a confusion het lavender to add to their project in order to make really, really amazing confusion lavender albinos. It doesn't matter. It's really realistically doesn't matter. Sure, there's people out there that have trouble, possibly affording doing testing for these animals. And if you're just running kind of a mill in your basement or whatever, yeah, that's going to cut into your overhead. I understand that. But again, we've been doing this with other animals for decades. Most of the time it's transparent. So you don't know that your dog has received immunizations for things like Bordetella or has already been tested for things like parvo before they're sold to you, or that your vet is automatically doing rabies tests if you're in an area that requires it. Of course, some people just refuse to participate in stuff like this, and that's a shame in the 21st century. So here's hoping that in 2022, now that we have labs available in Canada, we definitely know of labs available overseas, and we know of labs available here in the United States that can cheaply and easily screen your animals for things like nidovirus to protect them from unnecessary disease. I don't really understand why people would bring up something like privilege, right? So privilege, it's just a very strange and nonsensical thing to shoehorn in. So medical inequality is a very serious issue across the world and even within individual countries, even within individual states. And medical inequality is when there is an underserved community. So in this case, we don't really have an underserved community. We have tests that cost as little as $25 and tests that cost all the way up to $60. If you want to get something sequenced, you can do it for somewhere between $150 to $200. And that includes at University of Guelph or the University of Florida here in the United States. Leubocolin will test your animals, PALS UK will test your animals, Guelph will test your animals, Fishhead will test your animals, VetDNA will test your animals. The idea of a privilege or some sort of inequality in these animals is a completely ridiculous and nonsensical talking point from somebody that actually has a master's degree, which makes it even crazier. This is why this hobby needs to understand that we don't exist in a vacuum. This kind of testing has been done for years. And when you say things like privilege and inequality and being able to test these animals, it's completely nonsensical talking points that you got from the news. That's ridiculous. We should not have people like that interjecting those. We also need to go ahead and bust a few other myths. And while we're talking about myths, I give you the challenge. Send me to somebody, and they can remain anonymous, but I want to know who their veterinarian is. But send me to somebody that has completely euthanized an entire collection of animals. Oh, we're going back in the sleeve again. Send me to somebody that has euthanized an entire collection of animals because of one positive test and absolutely no showing of disease. Because that's another myth that we hear, is that people are just unnecessarily nuking entire collections with no disease. I don't believe that, and that would actually be a very, very interesting ethical problem if it came to a veterinarian that was actually suggesting that you should wipe out your entire collection if there's no presence of disease and you've only had one positive test in the entire collection. That is literally insane. That is an urban legend, but if you believe it isn't, then go ahead and send that person to me so I can talk directly to their vet. I 100% challenge you to do this. Let me know who that person is. I mean, we can even discuss payments for them to come on the internet and say, hi, I went ahead and wiped out 200 snakes based on one single test, and none of the other snakes actually had any visible disease. This is nonsense. It's completely nonsense. The whole idea of inequality is nonsense, and the whole idea of only privileged people being able to test these animals and understand what the test means is nonsense. Now, I have to go ahead and cut this short because I have to go solve the case of the disappearing snake. He's up my sleeve. He's up my sleeve.